The war in Ukraine drags on, and honestly, the world is desperate for a path to peace. But what if the whole approach we're seeing is, well, just completely wrong? In this explainer, we're going to dig into a pretty controversial idea, that the key to ending this thing isn't in Washington or Brussels, but actually in the East, specifically with India.
I mean, think about this analogy for a second. It really gets right to the heart of the problem. In any negotiation this intense, you absolutely have to have a mediator that both sides actually trust. Trying to strong-arm that mediator while they're trying to make a deal, it would be geopolitical madness.
And yet, that's pretty much exactly what's happening right now. The very countries that could be a bridge between the two sides are being pushed away by the same powers trying to broker a deal. It's like trying to build an arch and throwing away the keystone. It just can't work. So, who on earth could possibly fill this role? And that brings us to the first major hurdle: the search for a credible, neutral player in a world that, let's face it, has already picked sides.
This right here really highlights a massive contradiction. You see, the West is pushing for peace, but the United States, as Ukraine's biggest backer, isn't a neutral party, not even close. Asking them to mediate is like asking a boxer to referee his own title fight. It's performance, not real diplomacy.
Okay, so let's get into why the current peace process is just completely broken.
And this is a really crucial point. It's all about how sanctions are seen. From Moscow's point of view, these aren't just diplomatic tools, they're weapons of economic war. So when the West calls for a ceasefire but insists on keeping these crippling sanctions, Russia doesn't hear a peace proposal, it hears a demand for surrender. It's like telling someone to drop their weapon while you've still got a drone circling overhead.
And that leads us to the single biggest, most explosive flashpoint of all: $300 billion. That is the unbelievable value of Russia's central bank reserves that have been frozen by the West. What happens to this money? Well, it's become one of the most dangerous roadblocks to any kind of deal.
But here's the thing. Moving from just freezing that money to actually seizing it, well, that's a whole different ballgame with massive, massive risks. It would shatter a fundamental pillar of international law called sovereign immunity. That's the rule that keeps countries from just grabbing each other's stuff. It's what stops the global financial system from becoming the Wild West. You do that, you're practically inviting retaliation, you're pushing countries away from the dollar, and maybe worst of all, you're throwing away your single most powerful bargaining chip for making peace and actually rebuilding Ukraine.
So if the current way isn't working, what's the alternative? This brings us to the idea of a credible neutral, a power that can genuinely bridge this enormous divide.
And that's where India comes into the picture. It's the world's biggest democracy, and it has this really unique position. Think about it. It's a member of the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia, but it's also a member of BRICS with Russia and China. That lets India keep a good relationship with basically everyone involved. This is all possible because of India's core foreign policy, which is called strategic autonomy. You can think of it as a modern, really practical take on non-alignment. It's not about being neutral for the sake of it, it's about having the freedom and flexibility to talk to anyone from Washington to Moscow without being seen as somebody else's puppet. And really, when you just lay it out side by side, the picture becomes crystal clear. The US is a proxy combatant, leading the sanctions. China, from Ukraine's perspective, is fueling Russia's war machine. But India? It has a clean ledger. No sanctions on Russia, no weapons to either side. It's maintained access and, most importantly, trust, which at the end of the day is the most valuable currency in diplomacy.
But look, having the right mediator is only half the battle, right? You still need a plan, a real, workable plan. So what would a roadmap to peace actually look like?
So the proposed plan is a pretty serious four-step process. First up, military de-escalation. Troops pull back 50 miles, creating a buffer zone with neutral UN peacekeepers. Then, and this part is absolutely key, that military move is tied directly to economic de-escalation, with sanctions relief happening in stages. Third, you have to address the political core of the conflict, with new elections and a referendum to reshape Ukraine's constitution. And finally, you give the people in disputed regions a real voice through UN-supervised votes on their future.
And this right here, this is the core logic that holds the whole thing together. A ceasefire without lifting sanctions is just a pause button. It doesn't solve anything. But lifting sanctions without a secure peace deal, that's just reckless. The two have to be linked, step for step. You're essentially building a ladder that both sides can climb down together, where it just doesn't make sense for either of them to back out.
Which brings us full circle, or right back to that giant pile of cash and the incredibly high-stakes decision of what to do with it.
And the choice really couldn't be more stark. On the one hand, you seize the assets. That breaks international law and just torches the West's single biggest piece of leverage. On the other hand, you keep them frozen but use them as a powerful bargaining chip that upholds the law and creates this massive incentive for peace. It's the difference between a move that looks like desperation and one that shows real strategic discipline.
And you gotta understand, this is way bigger than just Ukraine now. This one decision will send a shockwave across the entire world. Seizing sovereign assets could push countries like China, India, and the Gulf states to start building their own financial systems, completely fracturing the global economy and weakening the very system the West wants to lead.
And that leaves us with this final, critical question. It's the paradox right at the heart of this whole thing. Can you pursue justice for an enemy without sacrificing the stability of your own system? The search for punishment has to be balanced against the need to preserve the global order. How the West answers this question, well, that's not just going to decide how this war ends. It's going to shape the world we all live in for decades.